The rain wasn't the worst part. It was the cardboard. The box, a flimsy vessel for a life's worth of professional dignity, was slowly surrendering its structural integrity to the indifferent afternoon downpour. Its corners, once sharp and definite, had softened into a pulpy, pathetic mush. Chloe felt a cold trickle of water slide down her wrist from the saturated base, a sensation that mingled with the damp chill already seeping through her light blue scrubs. These scrubs, once a uniform of pride, a second skin that connected her to a sacred calling, now felt like a costume from a play where she had been cast as the fool. They were a bright, cheerful blue, a stark and cruel joke against the gunmetal gray of the sky, the grimy pavement, and the crushing weight in her chest. Every drop of rain that struck the box felt personal, a tiny tap-tap-tap of cosmic mockery. Inside, her favorite stethoscope, a gift from her grandmother when she first graduated, lay nestled between a well-worn nursing textbook and a small, ceramic elephant meant to bring luck. The luck had apparently run out. The box sagged, threatening to betray her completely, to spill the last vestiges of her professional identity onto the wet, unforgiving sidewalk for the shuffling, incurious crowds to step over. She shifted her grip, hugging the disintegrating container to her body, a futile attempt to shield it with her own warmth. It was not the rain that broke her. It was the silence. The city moved around her with its usual cacophony, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the distant wail of a siren, the overlapping chatter of 100 strangers, but it was a wall of sound that she couldn't penetrate. She was encased in a bubble of profound and humiliating isolation. Just hours ago, she had been part of a team, a vital cog in a life-saving machine. Now, she was just an obstacle on a crowded street, a woman in damp clothes clutching a dying box. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. Tears were a currency she refused to spend on a man like Mr. Harrison. But the promise was a fragile thing, and the cold was starting to work its way past her skin and into her bones. Her path home stretched before her, a 15-block penance through the heart of the city's apathy. Each step was a conscious effort, her worn nursing shoes squelching with a sound that seemed to shout her failure to the world. She focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, a desperate anchor in the swirling chaos of shame and disbelief. She had done everything right. She had been meticulous, compassionate, observant. Her competence was a quiet, steady flame she had nurtured since her first day of nursing school. But in the end, it hadn't mattered. Her flame had been extinguished by a petty gust of wind, and now she was walking home in the dark, in the middle of the afternoon. The bottom of the box gave a final, mournful tear, and the corner of her textbook scraped against the pavement. She stopped, frozen, unable to bend down, unable to move forward. It was too much. The box, the rain, the scrubs, the long walk home. It was a perfect storm of degradation, and she was standing at its epicenter, utterly, terrifyingly alone. The day had begun not with a storm, but with the sterile, fluorescent hum of the fourth-floor surgical recovery ward. Chloe had been in her element, a silent conductor orchestrating a symphony of quiet care. Her movements were economical and precise, her eyes constantly scanning monitors, charts, and the subtle, unspoken language of her patients. She possessed a unique form of sight. She didn't just see data, she saw patterns. She saw the story a patient's body was telling, even when the patient themselves could not. This was the gift that had made her a brilliant nurse, and it was the gift that would ultimately be weaponized against her. The catalyst was Mr. Davies in room 412, a post-op appendectomy who, by all accounts, was recovering beautifully. His vitals were stable, his chart was clean. But Chloe saw something else. She saw a faint, almost imperceptible sheen of sweat on his brow that was inconsistent with the room's temperature. She noticed the slight lag in his pupil response when she checked it with her penlight, a micro-expression of pain he was too stoic to admit. While the attending physician, a rushed and confident young doctor, had signed off on his chart with a flourish, Chloe felt a cold knot of unease. She checked his medication log again. Everything was standard, yet the feeling persisted. It was a dissonant note in an otherwise perfect harmony. Her unit manager, Mr. Harrison, strutted past the nurse's station, his shoes clicking with an irritating self-importance. He was a man who wore his authority like an ill-fitting suit, constantly adjusting it for others to see. He thrived on the performance of power, not its actual application. He saw Chloe's focused frown and took it as a personal affront. "Something troubling you, Walker?" he asked, his tone laced with a condescending sweetness that set her teeth on edge. "Mr. Davies in 412, she said, keeping her voice level and professional. "His chart looks fine, but his nonverbals are indicating a higher level of pain than he's reporting. I think we should reevaluate his analgesia, perhaps consider a different agent. He might be having a paradoxical reaction." Harrison's smile tightened. To him, this wasn't diligence. It was insubordination. It was a nurse daring to see what a doctor had missed, and by extension what he, the manager, was not controlling. "Are you a doctor now, Chloe?" he asked, his voice loud enough for the other nurses and a passing orderly to hear. "Did you suddenly get a medical degree we are all unaware of?" The doctor signed off. "Your job is to administer, not to diagnose." The public nature of the rebuke was his signature move. He didn't correct, he humiliated. Chloe stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "My job is to advocate for my patient, Mr. Harrison. And my observations tell me something is wrong." That was her fatal error. She had used the word her observations, her competence. It was a direct challenge to his fragile ego. The confrontation escalated. Harrison accused her of chronically overstepping her duties and sowing doubt in the chain of command. He pulled her into his glass-walled office, the public spectacle continuing. He built his case with a series of twisted half-truths, citing past instances where her sharp observations had averted crises as examples of her refusal to stay in her lane. The final verdict was delivered with a theatrical sigh of regret. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. You are a liability to this hospital's procedural integrity." He slid a cardboard box across his desk. "Please gather your personal effects. Security will escort you from the premises." The walk from his office to her locker was the longest of her life. Every eye was on her. Harrison stood at the nurse's station, arms crossed, overseeing the ritual of her banishment. She packed her things with a slow, deliberate dignity, her hands steady, her face a mask of calm. She refused to give him the satisfaction of her tears. She packed the stethoscope, the textbook, the lucky elephant. She placed her professional life into a flimsy brown box and walked out of the world she loved, into the rain. Back on the street, the world had tilted on its axis. The monotonous rhythm of the city, the traffic, the rain, the shuffling feet, was violently interrupted. It started as a low, guttural hum, a vibration felt more in the bones than in the ears. It was a sound so alien to the urban soundscape that people stopped, their heads tilting like confused animals. The hum grew, swelling into a deep, resonant thrumming that vibrated the shop windows and sent ripples across the puddles on the sidewalk. Then, the wind came. Not the gentle breeze that precedes a storm, but a furious, directed gale that tore at umbrellas, plastered wet newspapers against buildings, and whipped Chloe's hair across her face. The rain, which had been falling vertically in a sad, steady drizzle, was now being driven sideways in stinging sheets. The source of the chaos became terrifyingly clear. Descending from the bruised belly of the clouds was a machine of impossible sleekness and menace. A helicopter. Not a police chopper or a news aircraft hovering at a polite distance, but a matte-black, weapon-grade beast of an aircraft, descending with predatory intent directly toward the street. It was a flagrant violation of every law of physics and city ordinance. Cars screeched to a halt, creating a discordant symphony of blaring horns. Pedestrians scattered, shouting and pointing, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. The helicopter was not aiming for a rooftop helipad or a park. It was landing in the middle of a major metropolitan avenue as if it were a private driveway. The sheer arrogance of the act was breathtaking. The downdraft was a physical force, a contained hurricane that ripped the disintegrating cardboard box from Chloe's numb fingers. The contents scattered across the wet pavement. Her textbook landed open, its pages immediately darkening with rain. The small ceramic elephant rolled into the gutter. Her stethoscope, the silver gleam of it suddenly so precious and lost, skidded under the wheel of a taxi. Chloe could only watch, paralyzed. This new, aggressive humiliation felt different from the quiet shame of her firing. This was loud, violent, and utterly surreal. The helicopter's landing skids touched the asphalt with a solid, final thud, its massive rotor blades slowing with a series of percussive whump-whump-whumps that seemed to beat in time with her own frantic heart. For a moment, the world held its breath. The chaos subsided into a stunned silence, broken only by the whine of the slowing turbines and the distant chorus of car alarms. A door on the side of the aircraft slid open with a smooth, hydraulic hiss, revealing a rectangle of darkness against the gray day. The city had stopped. Time itself seemed to have paused. Chloe stood in the middle of it all, soaked and exposed, the wreckage of her professional life scattered at her feet. She was no longer just a woman walking home in the rain. She had become the unwilling center of an event that defied all logic, a disruption so profound it felt like a scene from a movie, a tear in the very fabric of her reality. And she had no idea why. From the dark interior of the helicopter, a figure emerged. He moved with a stillness that was more commanding than any loud gesture. He wore a suit of such exquisite tailoring that the rain seemed to shun it, the water beating and rolling off the dark fabric without leaving a trace. He was flanked by two other men, built like mountains, their faces impassive and alert. But it was the man in the center who held the entire street captive with his presence. His hair was streaked with silver at the temples, his face a mask of controlled, lethal intensity. He stepped onto the wet pavement, and his eyes, sharp and dark, began to scan the panicked crowd. He wasn't looking at the chaos his arrival had caused. He was looking for something. For someone. Then, his voice cut through the air, not a shout, but a clear, resonant command that carried over the lingering noise. "Where is the nurse?" The question hung in the air, electric and absurd. People looked at each other, confused. A nurse? Here? Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a coincidence. It had to be. A terrible, bizarre coincidence. But then the man's gaze swept past the faces in the crowd and locked onto her. He saw the light blue scrubs, now dark and heavy with rain. He saw her, frozen in place. His search was over. As his intense gaze bore into her, the present dissolved, and her mind flashed back 3 months to a different kind of chaos. It was the 2 a.m. witching hour in the emergency room, a frantic ballet of controlled panic. A quiet, elderly man had been brought in, not by ambulance, but through a discreet side entrance by 2 silent, anxious men. He had a deep, but clean, stab wound in his side, the kind that spoke of intention, not accident. He spoke no English, and his eyes were clouded with pain and fear. While other staff were busy with more loudly demanding patients, Chloe had taken him. She saw not a case file, but a frightened old man. She had cleaned the wound with a gentle, practiced efficiency that was its own form of language. She spoke to him in soft tones, using hand gestures to explain what she was doing, her calm presence a balm against his terror. But it was her observation that had mattered most. As she was about to apply a standard sterile dressing, she noticed a faint redness on his wrist from the hospital ID band. It was a minor detail, almost nothing. But to Chloe, it was a signal. She paused. She looked at the man's chart, no known allergies. But the skin told a different story. Instead of the standard adhesive dressing, she meticulously crafted a hypoallergenic alternative, using sterile gauze and silk tape she knew to be inert. One of the silent men had watched her every move, his expression unreadable. She had simply nodded to him, a gesture of professional reassurance, and moved on to the next crisis. She never learned the old man's name. She never saw him again. He was just one of 100 faces in the relentless tide of the ER. She had done her job, quietly, competently. Now, standing on the rain-lashed street, she looked at the powerful man who had just torn a hole in the sky to find her. And in the hard lines of his face, she saw the faint, familial echo of the frightened old man she had treated with simple, human decency. The silent man who had watched her every move was standing right beside him. Mr. Kwan, the man from the helicopter, had not been looking for a nurse. He had been looking for the nurse, the one who had seen what others missed. Mr. Kwan's steps were deliberate as he closed the distance between them. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze dropping from her face to the pathetic scene at her feet, the soaked textbook, the glint of the lost stethoscope, the brave little elephant in the gutter. A flicker of something, not pity, but a cold, hard anger, passed through his eyes. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable but for the intensity of his focus. I need you, he said. The words were not a request. They were a statement of fact, a declaration of a need so profound it had justified grounding a helicopter in the middle of a city street. Chloe was still reeling, caught between the memory of the ER and the impossible present. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She was a nurse without a hospital, a professional without a place. What could he possibly need from her? Mr. Kwan's gaze was sharp, analytical. He took in her drenched scrubs, the exhaustion etched onto her face, the way she stood as if bracing for another blow. He gestured with his chin toward the hospital insignia stitched over her heart. That place. They did this. Again, it wasn't a question that expected a long answer. He was confirming a conclusion he had already reached. When she didn't respond, he simply nodded, a short, sharp motion. He pulled out a sleek black phone, spoke a few rapid sentences in Korean into it, his voice low and guttural. The command was unmistakable in any language. He snapped the phone shut, and his attention was back on her, absolute and undivided. "We're going back," he stated. One of his men moved forward and, with a surprising gentleness, began gathering her scattered belongings. He picked up the stethoscope, wiping it carefully on his sleeve before placing it in his own pocket. Another retrieved the textbook and the small elephant. They treated her meager possessions with the reverence of holy relics. Chloe felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. The world was spinning too fast. I can't go back there," she finally managed to say, the words tasting like ash. "I was just fired." Mr. Kwan's expression did not soften. "You are not going back there for them," he said, his voice like chips of ice. "You are going back there for me." He turned and walked toward the helicopter without looking back, a silent command for her to follow. Hesitantly, she took a step, then another. The interior of the helicopter was another world. It was all black leather and polished chrome, silent and insulated from the storm outside. The moment the door hissed shut, the chaotic noise of the city vanished, replaced by a low, powerful hum. As the aircraft lifted off, the city falling away beneath them, Chloe watched the hospital grow larger in the window. It was a place of immense pain and recent humiliation, and she was flying back to it in the private helicopter of a man who looked like he could buy and sell the entire institution before breakfast. She was trapped in a new reality, one governed by a power she couldn't comprehend, heading back to the scene of her greatest failure, not as a pariah, but as a desperately needed asset. The irony was a bitter pill, and she had no choice but to swallow it. The flight was short, a brutal slash across the city's skyline. As they banked towards the hospital, Mr. Kwan finally spoke, his words cutting through the controlled silence of the cabin. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. His sentences were short, dense with urgency. "My father," he began, his gaze fixed on the approaching hospital. "He is here. A private procedure. A specialist from Seoul." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Something is wrong. The monitors aren't acceptable. The doctors say he is stable. They lie. Or they are blind." He turned his head and looked directly at Chloe, and in that moment, she understood the terrifying weight of his summons. "They do not see," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "I need your eyes." He was talking about the incident from 3 months ago. He was talking about the adhesive allergy. A detail so small, so insignificant in the grand scheme of a hospital's daily drama, but it had been a signal of a different kind of perception. To him, it was proof of a competence that transcended charts and machines. He didn't trust the world-renowned specialist. He didn't trust the million-dollar equipment. He trusted the quiet, observant nurse who had noticed a patch of red skin on his father's wrist. The stakes slammed into Chloe with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't about a routine checkup. This was about the patriarch of what was clearly a powerful and likely dangerous organization. The procedure was off the books, a secret held within the hospital's highest levels, a place she was no longer authorized to even enter. She was being asked to walk into a high-stakes medical crisis, armed with nothing but her own observational skills, and challenge the diagnosis of a top-tier surgeon. The helicopter didn't land on the public emergency pad. It settled on a private, discreet helipad on the roof of the hospital's exclusive VIP wing, a section of the building Chloe had only ever heard about in whispers. The moment the blade stopped, the door slid open, and they were moving. Mr. Kwan's men formed a protective wedge, sweeping them down a sterile, silent corridor that smelled of money and antiseptic. They bypassed all regular security checkpoints with a single, cold stare from Mr. Kwan. It was as if the normal rules of the world had been temporarily suspended for him. Chloe, in her damp, wrinkled scrubs, hurried to keep up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was an imposter here, a ghost haunting the halls of her former employer. But Mr. Kwan walked with the absolute certainty of a man who owned any space he chose to occupy. He was taking her back into the lion's den, not just to face the lion, but to tell it that it was wrong. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight of expectation. If she was wrong, she would not just be embarrassing herself. She would be failing a man who had ripped a hole in the sky for her. And she had a chilling certainty that failure was a concept Mr. Kwan did not tolerate. Her career had died once today. She was now in a position where a single mistake could have consequences far worse than just losing a job. The VIP suite was less like a hospital room and more like the command bridge of a starship. A panoramic window looked out over the rain-swept city. The air was cold and crackled with a silent, high-stakes tension. In the center of the room, on a bed laden with advanced technology, lay the old man from the emergency room, Mr. Kwan's father. He looked smaller, more fragile than she remembered. Monitors beeped in a steady, deceptively calm rhythm. Standing near the bed was a man with an air of immense self-importance, his arms crossed defensively. This had to be the surgeon from Seoul. He was arguing in low, heated Korean with one of Mr. Kwan's lieutenants. When he saw Chloe enter in her simple scrubs, his face twisted in a sneer of contempt. "What is this? Who is this?" he demanded, switching to clipped, arrogant English. "This is a sterile environment. Get her out." Mr. Kwan moved to stand beside Chloe, a silent, immovable wall of power. "She stays," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He then turned his gaze to Chloe, and with a slight nod toward his father, he gave her the most terrifying order she had ever received. Look, for a moment, Chloe was frozen by the sheer audacity of the situation. The world-famous surgeon, the crime lord, the dying patriarch. But then, her training took over. The noise, the politics, the fear, it all faded into the background. There was only the patient. She walked to the bedside, her focus narrowing to a pinpoint. She ignored the surgeon's indignant sputtering. She ignored Mr. Kwan's hawk-like gaze. She began her assessment, her senses her only true instruments. She saw the subtle grayish pallor of the old man's skin, a sign of poor perfusion the machines might not flag for another hour. She smelled the faint, sweet, almost fruity scent on his breath, a potential indicator of metabolic distress. She touched his hand. It was cool and clammy. The surgeon scoffed. "His vitals are within acceptable post-operative parameters." This is normal sedation recovery, but Chloe wasn't looking at the vitals. She was looking at the whole picture. She scanned the array of 4 bags, her eyes tracing the lines, reading the labels. A standard sedative, a broad-spectrum antibiotic, an electrolyte drip, all normal. But then her memory, a vast and cross-referenced library of patient interactions, sparked. The old man in the ER 3 months ago. Through a translator app, he had tried to explain his herbal supplements. He had shown her a picture of a specific root. At the time, she had logged it, but it had no known interactions with the simple treatments he received then. Now, in this complex post-operative chemical cocktail, it was a different story. "The sedative," Chloe said, her voice clear and steady. "It's a benzodiazepine." "What herbal supplements does he take?" The surgeon waved a dismissive hand. "Irrelevant folk medicine. It's not irrelevant," Chloe insisted, her voice gaining strength. "There is a specific Goreo root that, when combined with this class of sedative, can potentiate its effects exponentially. It doesn't just sedate. It can induce a slow, creeping neuromuscular blockade. His systems aren't failing. They're being systematically shut down." The surgeon stared at her, aghast. It was a rare, obscure interaction, something from a textbook footnote, not a real-world crisis. But it was real. Mr. Kwan looked from the surgeon's stunned face to Chloe's absolute certainty. He trusted the eyes, not the reputation. "Fix it," he commanded. Chloe moved with swift precision. She clamped the sedative line, opened the saline drip to full, and announced the exact counteragent and dosage needed to reverse the effect. For a long, terrifying minute, nothing changed. The room was utterly silent, but for the steady beep of the monitors. Then, a single, blessed flutter of the old man's eyelids. A deeper breath. The grayish pallor began to recede, replaced by a faint flush of color. The monitors began to shift, their numbers climbing from acceptable to optimal. She hadn't used a defibrillator or performed a dramatic surgery. She had saved his life with a memory, an observation, and a quiet refusal to accept the obvious. She had seen the story no one else could read. Once his father was stable and resting, the calm in the room was replaced by a different kind of intensity. Mr. Kwan's focus shifted, his gratitude silent, but his purpose hardening into a sharp point. He spoke quietly to one of his men, who nodded and left the suite. A few minutes later, the door opened, and two of Kwan's men escorted a pale, trembling Mr. Harrison into the room. He had been plucked from his office, his smug authority stripped away layer by layer with every floor he ascended in the private elevator. He entered the VIP suite and his eyes widened, taking in the scene. The powerful men, the advanced medical equipment, and Chloe, standing not as a disgraced subordinate, but as a respected expert near the bedside of the room's most important occupant. The hospital's chief administrator, a man Harrison had spent years fawning over, was already there, summoned earlier and now standing in a corner, trying to make himself as small as possible. The power dynamics of the room had been violently rewritten. Mr. Kwan let the silence stretch, forcing Harrison to absorb the full, terrifying context of his new reality. Harrison's gaze darted from Kwan to Chloe and back again, his face a mess of confusion and dawning horror. He opened his mouth, perhaps to offer a sycophantic greeting, but Kwan cut him off without a word, simply holding up a hand. He then walked over to a supply closet and pulled out a cheap, standard-issue cardboard box, identical to the one Harrison had given Chloe. He placed it on a table in the center of the room with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence. He turned to Harrison, his voice devoid of all emotion, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Chloe with a nod of his head, "is the most skilled medical professional in this building. Her eyes just saved a life that your most expensive surgeon was prepared to lose." He took a step closer to Harrison, who involuntarily flinched. "And you," Mr. Kwan continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "threw her out. You throw away a diamond because you are too blind to see past the dust. You mistake control for competence. You are a liability." He then turned to one of his men and pointed at Harrison's expensive leather briefcase, which had been brought up with him. "Empty it." The man unceremoniously unzipped the briefcase and dumped its contents into the cardboard box. A laptop, a sterling silver pen, a leather-bound planner, a set of keys, the superficial markers of Harrison's petty status, clattered into the box in a pathetic heap. Mr. Kwan picked up the box and pushed it into Harrison's chest, forcing him to take it. The scene was a perfect, brutal mirror of Chloe's humiliation just hours before. "You are fired," Mr. Kwan stated, looking past Harrison to the terrified administrator. The administrator nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. "Yes, of course, absolutely. His employment is terminated." Mr. Kwan's final words were the coup de grace. "Now walk home." He gestured to the door. Security guards, the very ones who had escorted Chloe out, now stood ready to do the same to their former boss. As they led a stunned, speechless Mr. Harrison from the room, clutching his own box of shame, Chloe looked out the panoramic window. The afternoon storm had returned, and a fresh downpour was beginning to lash against the glass. The symmetry was complete, the justice poetic and absolute. 1 year later, the words hang in the air like a title card, and the scene dissolves from the cold, sterile hospital to one of warmth and vibrant life. The camera pans across the entrance of a brand new building, its glass and steel facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. The sign reads, "The Kwan Walker Wellness Initiative." It's a state-of-the-art community health clinic planted in the heart of a neighborhood that had been a healthcare desert for decades. Inside, there is no sterile silence, only the bustling, hopeful hum of a community being cared for. The waiting room is full, but the atmosphere is calm and respectful. Nurses and doctors move with unhurried purpose. Presiding over it all is Chloe. She is no longer in scrubs. She wears a crisp white coat, the embroidered name Chloe Walker, director, stitched over the pocket. She is not a doctor yet, but the path has been cleared. Mr. Kwan, true to his nature of expressing gratitude through action, had funded a full scholarship to medical school. He had built this clinic from the ground up, a testament to his respect and a platform for her talent, ready for her the day she graduated. She moves through the clinic with a quiet, confident authority. It is the same focused energy she had on the hospital ward, but now it is amplified, validated, and given the resources to flourish. She greets patients by name, consults with her staff, her observations still her sharpest tool. But now, her insights don't challenge a fragile ego. They set the standard of care. There is a small gathering in the clinic's community room, celebrating its 1-year anniversary. Mr. Kwan is there, standing quietly in the back, observing the world he helped create. He is not the menacing figure from the helicopter. Here, in this place of healing, he is simply a benefactor, his power a force for construction, not disruption. He watches Chloe as she speaks to the staff and community members, her voice filled with a passion that had been silenced but never extinguished. Later, as the celebration winds down, he approaches her on the clinic's rooftop garden, which overlooks the neighborhood. The city's skyline glitters in the distance. For a long moment, they stand in a comfortable silence, watching the world she is now changing. "You built this," he says finally, his voice a low rumble. It is a statement of deep respect. Chloe turns to him, a small, genuine smile on her face. "We built this," she corrects him gently. The "we" hangs in the air, a recognition of their strange, powerful symbiosis. He gives a rare, almost imperceptible nod of agreement. He looks out at the city, then back at her. "Come with me," he says, the words echoing his first command to her a year ago. But the tone is entirely different. It is not an order, but an invitation. "You will never walk home in the rain again." It's a promise that has already been kept, a simple statement of a new and permanent reality. He leads her to the edge of the roof, pointing not down at the streets, but towards an adjacent, empty lot. "The pediatric wing," he says. "We begin construction next week." Her ascent was not just a reversal of fortune. It was the beginning of a legacy, built from the ashes of a single, terrible day. The camera pulls back from the thriving clinic, the image of Chloe and Mr. Kwan planning the future fading until we are left with Chloe, standing alone. The setting is indistinct, timeless. She turns her head and looks directly into the lens, breaking the barrier between her story and our reality. Her expression is calm, her eyes filled with a profound and earned wisdom. Her voice, when she speaks, is not that of a narrator, but of a trusted friend sharing a fundamental truth. "They will tell you to know your place," she begins, her voice steady and clear. "They will build walls around your talent and call them rules. They will tell you that the chart is more important than the patient, that procedure is more important than perception. They will mistake your quiet competence for weakness, your diligence for insubordination." She pauses, letting the words settle. "There will be days when the rain comes for you. There will be a day when it feels like your entire world has been packed into a flimsy cardboard box, when your spirit feels like it's dissolving on a dirty street while the world walks by without noticing. You will feel small. You will feel invisible. You will feel finished." Her gaze intensifies, forging a direct connection with the viewer. "But your skill," she says, a new fire entering her voice. "That is the one thing they can never take from you. The part of you that sees what others miss, that feels the dissonant note in a perfect symphony, that knows the right thing to do when everyone else is looking at the wrong data. That is not just your job, it is your currency. It is your gravity. It is the only real power you will ever have. Do not let them define its worth. Do not let their blindness convince you that you cannot see. Nurture it. Trust it. It is a signal in the noise. It is the voice that will guide you when all other voices are telling you you're wrong." She takes a small breath, her final words a powerful call to action. "Don't wait for the helicopter to fall out of the sky and save you. That's not how the world works. The helicopter is a metaphor. It is the moment that preparedness meets opportunity. You have to be ready. You have to be so good they can't ignore you. So good they can't afford to lose you. Be so good that your talent becomes its own form of power, a force of nature they cannot control. A faint, confident smile touches her lips. Be so good that when the storm comes, and it will come, you are the one they call to stop the rain. The final shot holds on her face, a portrait of resilience, confidence, and absolute self-worth. Her story is over, but its lesson has just begun.